Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. We'll give you a couple seconds to get adjusted and we'll get started. Okay, it is 5:32 and we want to honor everyone's time. So thank you so much for joining us. Greetings, friends and families. I'm Dr. Ashley Bennett, co-leader of Accept, and on behalf of Accept, which is the admissions community cultivating equity and peace today, I'm excited to welcome you all to the first session in the Being Black in College webinar series. To provide a bit of context, I want to share how we got here. For those of you who are familiar with Accept, you may have noticed that we're offering loads of online content. After the deaths of Atiana Jefferson, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, in addition to too many others to name, we decided we needed to offer something specific to Black students. As you may be aware, the college landscape is completely different for Black identifying students, and we want to honor that. Navigating Blackness in America has never been easy, but we have seen the ugliness of racism in recent years that directly affects the Black community. While we know we can't scratch the surface in an hour, we hope what you experience here today sparks conversation in your homes, in your schools, and ultimately in your lives. With that, I ask that tonight's panelists introduce themselves by sharing who they are, where they work, and why today's topic speaks to them. So we'll get started with Angelica.
Hello, my name is Angelica Keelan. I'm a kindergarten teacher, and this topic is important to me because I went to Texas A&M University, and I did not know what to expect going from a school with majority minorities to going to a PWI. So I thought it was really important to give my insight on my experience there.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Kayla introduce herself.
Hi friends, my name is Kayla Storrs. I serve as the Assistant Director for Diversity Enrichment Programs at the University of Oklahoma. And this series specifically is very important to me because I work largely with prospective underrepresented students, our African-American students, as they are pursuing a higher education, going through the application and admissions process. And there's just so much that needs to be known when working with these students to ensure that they have the tools and the information necessary to make informed decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Diane?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Diane Graves. I'm a faculty member in psychology and counseling at Hood College here in Frederick, Maryland. This topic is very important to me. Not only did I attend PWIs, both for my undergrad and my PhD, but also because I teach at a PWI, and I thought it would be incredibly important to have a faculty member's perspective on what things are like and what expectations are there for students of color and students across the board. So I'm really honored to be here.
Thank you. Kelly? Oh, Kelly may be having technical difficulty. We'll come back. Stefan?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stefan Golis. I'm leaving one position as a Director of University Relations at a French international school in Toronto, Canada, and I'll be starting at the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools in Chicago as a college counselor in just a few weeks. This is, I think, my 18th or 19th year working in university admissions and college counseling, and this panel and this work speaks to me because as somebody who lives in white skin, but who has the positions that I do in the institutions that I do, it's important to use that privilege to make sure that all of my students, but particularly my students who've been historically underrepresented and underserved, really have an advocate in position like mine.
Thank you. Kelly just messaged me that she lost power, so hopefully she'll be able to jump back on in a second, and when she does, I'll have her introduce herself. But to conserve time, we'll go ahead and jump in. So a couple of things that I do want to share before we start is we are sharing today about being Black in a predominantly white institution. And so we just want to ask that you all have great conversations in the chat box. And for the last 20 minutes, we'll have a Q&A session. So the chat box will be open to everyone all throughout the session. And the last 20 minutes will be Q&A. And as this is a session about Blackness, we do ask for our non-Black attendees to observe that and recognize that while we want you to participate in the conversation, absolutely, we also want to amplify the voices on this panel and Black voices that may exist in the chat space as well. All right, Kelly is back. Uh-oh, is she gone again? Oh, we can see you, we can't hear you. Okay, we'll come back. Oh, wait.
Okay, I'm so sorry. I am
Okay.
here. I lost power. I'm sorry. My name is Kelly Emerson. I am an academic advisor for Lee College Trio Student Support Services. Lee College is located in Baytown, Texas. This topic is very important to me because I had a uniquely different experience at a PWI, being that it was located in New Orleans, Louisiana. So, and I wanted to share that because it, is very different.
Thank you. And with that, friends, we will go ahead and jump right in. So whoever is ready to answer these questions, just jump in. There's no order, so just make yourself comfortable. What advice do you offer Black students who are interested in attending a predominantly white institution?
I'll go ahead and hop in here first. Working in admissions, specifically at a predominantly white institution, I've got a lot of Black students that will be exploring options, and that's one of the biggest pieces of advice that I can give is to make sure that you're exploring all of your options, and fit is so very important. If you choose to go with a predominantly white institution, know that there are no two PWIs that are exactly the same. You want to dive in, do some research, find an institution that you can envision yourself being successful at for the next 4 to 5 years, or however long that collegiate career is going to take you. Look into resources, see if you can find different student organizations that are relevant to some of the things that you're interested in. Look for some of the different offices, serve some of the marginalized identities that maybe you have. You want to find your champions on that campus, because having a champion, having someone who is there, who's going to advocate for you, who's going to be a voice for you, who's going to elevate your voice and your experience is so very important. And that's the best way, in my opinion, to be successful as a Black student at a predominantly white institution, is finding one that is a good fit for you specifically, and the things that you're looking for and the resources that are going to be specific to your experience.
Yeah, I'll jump after that. This is Diane Graves. So, as a person who went to PWI, I wasn't sure exactly what to expect. My high school was actually, I was one of the few African Americans in my classes at my high school. And so when I went to a PWI, it wasn't all that different than it was in high school, except there was at least a number of people at that school who looked like me. And it was the first time I actually had a chance to connect with them and feel like I was part of a Black community. So one of the things I would encourage is to look to see if they have a transition program or an early orientation program at that PWI. That would give you a chance to get to campus a little sooner than some of the other students, than the majority students, and to connect and make those friendships that will carry you through that time. That was probably one of the most pivotal things that I did as an undergrad at a PWI, was go to that early orientation program that was specifically targeted for African American students. I can only encourage you to look into that. Also making sure that at that PWI, just dovetailing what was already mentioned, how important it is to be part of, if there's a Black student union, if there's some other opportunity for you to stay connected. You might not realize how important that is at first, but over the course of 4 years that you're there, you will experience some difficulties, and it will be helpful to have not only support across the years, and those organizations will have people who are sophomores, freshmen, seniors, that can help you appreciate the context of what's happening, but also they'll have a faculty mentor. And that faculty mentor will be someone who's committed to making sure that those voices are heard and that you can safely get your needs addressed to the administration of the school and also to other faculty members at the school. So being part of that Black Student Union will give you a chance to get connected with that faculty member who will help you find a way to get your needs met with the other faculty and administration at the school.
Just to go and tie into that, I agree with everything said. So my piece of advice would be to really research your school, not just your school, but the surrounding area, because when I first went to my PWI, I only looked at the school and all the clubs they had. I didn't really research the town. And I went from living in Houston to living in a very small city. And that's not something I like. So make sure that you're prepared to, you look into all aspects of the school. And also, this might be controversial, but don't be afraid to transfer if you feel like you don't want to be there. Like at the end of the day, you're paying to go to the school. So if you're at the point where you're so unhappy being there, it's okay to leave. It's okay to find another school. It's okay to go to a HBCU. It's whichever is best for your academic lifestyle and also your mental health.
I would, building upon that, you know, the importance of doing research, I think, and this idea of fit, I don't think we can overstate how important doing that research is to make sure that when you find schools that you think are interesting, it's beyond just what you see on the website or what you see in the information that you have mailed to you, if you have anything mailed to you. Universities and colleges have wonderful marketing and public relations departments. And, you know, just what you see on the surface is just that, it's just on the surface. And so there is a plethora of data out there that you can use to get beyond that surface to see, is this really a place that's going to honor who I am and what I bring to this campus? Or am I just going to maybe be another face that they're going to put in a brochure? And I think that's something really important to think about, not just, you know, they say they care about equity, they care about inclusion, they care about diversity, but they're really putting their money where their mouth is there. And so that means not just looking at, again, those pictures, those brochures, but really digging into, okay, what do the demographics of the student body really mean, right? And how many kids who look like me are there really on campus? What are the resources that are there for us so that we can thrive? And then not only who else is going to be in my classrooms and how might that affect or impact my experience, my lived experience in this place, but also who's at the front of the classroom. And what might that impact of having a mentor who might identify in a way that I do, what might that mean for me? I think there's a lot of general stuff we could talk about today about this, but when it comes to identity, you know, it's important that you feel like you're seen and you're heard, whoever you are, and getting beyond that surface of what that advertising and marketing department is sending your way is important. So ask the questions, see who's teaching us, look at the graduation rates of Black students as compared to maybe other students of other backgrounds to see, are they really supporting the diversity and equity and inclusion they say they really are? Or are we just there for the PR? I think that's really important to get into.
And I just want to be able to echo that as well. So for example, oftentimes you'll see the graduation rates. Those are the general graduation rates at that institution. You have to actually ask and dig to get those rates for people of color. So in my institution, sadly, the graduation rates for African-American males are almost 20 percentage points lower than our general graduation rates. And so that would be very important information for anyone to, you know, to have.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So the next question, in your experience as an educator, do you find that Black students who attend PWIs were prepared to do so?
I think yes and no. I think there's a lot of variability. Some students are quite ready. Other students, based on the resources that they've had available to them, have not necessarily learned how to advocate for themselves in a way that feels comfortable. So there's a higher expectation of just sort of advocating for yourself at PWIs, I think. And some of my students haven't learned how to do that well, how to learn to be persistent in order to get resources to come your way, or have been misunderstood when they have been persistent as being aggressive. And so I think there's some interesting fine lines in academia about how African-American students are viewed on campus at PWIs by a variety of different types of faculty members. So there's so much nuance in that question, but I think some students they're more than prepared to be successful there, but knowing how to interface with those resources in a way that will keep them being effective over the course of their 4 years, I don't think we get enough of that. And you've heard mentioned multiple times how important mentors are. And I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to get connected to mentors on campus so that you can learn how to navigate those waters at your particular institution. Otherwise, there will be opportunities that you will not know about, that you miss. And there will be opportunities for people to misunderstand you and mischaracterize you and end up coming back at you. So definitely find the professors like me, find the professors who are on campus who want to help you and want to help you be successful there. I don't find that people aren't ready to be there. They just don't necessarily know how to work the system.
I think in my experience, my students are as prepared as they can be. Because I do work for TRIO, a lot of my students ask, is there a TRIO at that particular institution? And it's because they want to find a place to belong, like one place to transition from belonging to another subset of place, to belonging. And I think initially they go in with high hopes that the experience for them is going to be a great one. And then unfortunately may encounter some things that they thought were behind, whether that's, Black female going into a situation where not only is race an issue, but gender may be an issue for them, or just, again, the blanketed issue of race and racism, and not really fully being prepared for that, especially when the majority of the people you interact with look like you, or the majority of the people in your circle, if they do not look like you, have an understanding of who you are, and support you in the best way that they can. So stepping into that definitely can be a little nerve-wracking. And like I said, they're as prepared as they can be because situations change all the time. So I always say, make sure you go in and you find, a program similar to ours, or definitely get involved. So when those tough times do happen, there is someone that can love on you, per se.
So from personal experience on my end, I think academically across the board, students kind of vary just in terms of academic preparation, depending on what type of institution you may be tricked to. But I tend to find Black students socially struggling to accept the social parameters that come with attending a predominantly white institution, specifically the University of Oklahoma. I've worked with prospective students who will see things on the news, and they know that unfortunately OU happens to be in the news for not things in terms of race and different racial incidences on campus. And so we have prospective students that are coming in and they are aware of the fact that, hey, there may be a time in my collegiate career where I have to become an activist in addition to my actual student role. But I think that a lot of students don't realize how quick they have to put that hat on, unfortunately, depending on what institution you may be attending. I had freshmen this year who last year were, hip to all of the national news that was taking place and what was going on OU's campus, and came in and knew that at some point that would probably happen to them, that they would be in the midst of some type of media debacle or racist incident or tiff with the university administration or something of the sort. And it took place their freshman year with a sit-in in our president's office for an entire week. And so you get burnout, you get exhaustion, you get this, man, I knew that it was going to happen, but I didn't really know that it was going to happen as quick as it did. And now I'm overwhelmed, and I thought that I was equipped to put on this activism hat, but I really just kind of want to enjoy my collegiate experience, and I haven't really had time to do that because now I got to go put on for the culture, because if I don't put on for the culture, who's going to put on for the culture? And so that activism side of things that unfortunately I think in years past wasn't an expectation, and going into 2020 and seeing that these things take place almost everywhere, it's just a matter of who gets the national news attention with them, comes now with the expectation of, hey, if I'm a Black student and I choose to go to a predominantly white institution, at some point, I'm going to have to put this activist hat on. And so in theory, it sounds great. I'm ready for it. I'm going to do it when it comes. I think in practice, it hits students a bit sooner than they expect, and it catches them off guard, and it's really disheartening and discouraging sometimes.
It's not only disheartening and discouraging, you're completely right. I couldn't agree with you more. It can also be really dangerous as far as your grades and maintaining academic standing at the institution, because by finding a way to balance the activism with academics is going to be a journey that each of us who go to these schools have to find. And unfortunately, there are going to be some people who will lean more towards the activism, which is in theory really great, but there's so much more that you can do when you have that degree. So to keep that in your sights, that at some point you might need to pull back from some of the activism so that you can graduate. There's a reason you're there, and that, there's a lot of sacrifices you might have to make. So maybe that some of the social stuff has to go so that you can do some of the activism as well as get your work done in your classes. At some institutions, the faculty are more sensitive to activist students as far as negotiating ways, requirements in courses, due dates, if there's a sit-in, being flexible with that. At other institutions, that is not the case. And you might feel like you have to choose between being active and being an academic. And I think that's something for you to think about before starting at that school. And the best way to get a gauge of that is to talk to current students, to get a sense of how they have found that balance and what has worked for them in order to still be successful in the classroom, get that degree so they can start doing even more to forward social progress. So definitely talk to current students, not just those in the admissions office, but those that you see walking around, or people that are on YouTube. Listen to what they have to say about their experiences. Try to put together some patterns that you might be hearing about what student life is like as a Black student on that campus.
I think too, there's, my experience with Black students that I've worked with is that categorically across the board academically, not only have they been prepared, but I think they've been more than prepared and ready to go. And what I think that they're not prepared for, and I would say that from, just to give you perspective, I've worked predominantly at independent schools, right? And those students who went into university feeling very affirmed by their experience at the PWIs that they were coming from, these independent schools in Washington and Los Angeles, they were coming from Toronto. What they maybe weren't prepared for was not being affirmed, particularly in their first 6 months of school, the first semester, when they had maybe that first interaction with an academic advisor who might have been somebody who just looked at their file 5 minutes before they walked in the door and or a new roommate and their family, coming from a place, particularly if you feel some affinity to your high school and you feel a real strong sense of community there, and then you go off to university where perhaps you've been traditionally excluded, regardless of what the university or college might say about how excited they are to have you there, the whiteness is still in the bones of those institutions, and the exclusion is still in the bones of those institutions. And so the microaggressions can come fast and furious. And if you're not, I would imagine, if you are not prepared for that, or weren't expecting those, and I'm not saying that everybody's going to have that and it's going to be a terrible experience at a PWI, but not everybody is on board with the diversity or equity or inclusion mission statement of the university or college you're attending. And I've worked with a number of students who have just been unbelievable students who've gone on to outstanding universities across the country. They did their homework, and then when they had that first meeting with their white advisor in the biology department, who said, "Oh, really? You don't strike me as a science kid." You know, that just completely deflate a student. And so I think that's something that those of us who work in high schools need to do a better job of, is really helping our students find that voice, find that strength, find that belief that I do belong. I wouldn't be here if I didn't. I wouldn't be here if I couldn't do the work. So open the same doors for me, because I deserve to be here. I think we need to do a better job as high school educators and making our students understand that they do belong and they are prepared and that their voice is important.
Thank you. So do you think there's anything that Black students can do in advance to prepare themselves to attend a PWI?
Diane hit on this earlier, and I can't drive it home anymore. Get connected to current Black students and ask real questions. And I can't remember who said, make sure, the ones outside of the admissions office, the ones working in the admissions office, they're great resources. But yes, you want to see if you can find some current Black students that are outside of the admissions office that are going to give you real answers to very real questions. If anyone is going to give you the true insight into what to expect, what the experience is, it's going to be Black students that are in the trenches right here, right now, doing the work, living the experience. And you'd be surprised how many are excited and willing to share their experiences with you. And so I can't drive that home enough. Get connected to currents and ask very real questions. There's no such thing as too real. Ask all the real questions.
Exactly. Like, where can I get my hair done? Where can I get certain products? Where can I go get certain foods? Just the basics of managing yourself, while you're away at college, having some connection to knowing where I can get these things, so that if you don't have easy access to transportation, I know I didn't have a car in college, and then the hair place that all the Black students went to was, a 40-minute bus ride. So learning how to navigate that, and it was a thing. So you wouldn't find that out unless you talked to us on campus and said, what's going on? What about parties? What about dating life? The kinds of things that I'm looking for in college, does that exist here? I remember talking to one student who had gone to a large school, a large PWI in Virginia, and African-American student, and she said that she was surprised. She thought when she went to such a big school that she would have this great opportunity to connect with other Black students like her. And what she found was there was almost more homogeneity in some of the Black students at this school, and she had wished she'd gone to an HBCU because there would be more heterogeneity in the Black community. There's a lot of different kinds of Black folks at schools where the numbers are bigger, but where the numbers are smaller, the admissions committees have done what they can to try to diversify the Black folks, but you're going to tend to get a more narrow, swish of Black folks, and finding out if those are in fact the kinds of other Black students that you feel comfortable with, that you would enjoy getting to know, and that you don't just sequester yourself with the other Black students, but you're the kind of student who also is willing to cross over to make friends, roommate friends, on your hallway friends, in your classes, study partners, that look different from you. Part of the benefit of going to a PWI is forming those networks. So that's got to be something that you feel that you can do, is form those networks. It's going to be hard if that's going to be a challenge for you. It's going to be hard to navigate a space where the majority of people don't look like you.
And I also say, like, check out the campus when nothing is going on. So we're saying, like, seek out the everyday Black student, but kind of see what the environment looks like with Black students every day when, and it sounds bad to say, like, when we're not on display, like during the open houses or the preview days or events like that. Actually, like, take a look around campus, because we do that in our everyday life when we're moving or things like that. You want to see what the environment looks like after certain hours. So I do advise, going to see, where the students are congregating on a normal day before you get there. My case was unique for my small PWI in New Orleans because I was surrounded by two HBCUs. We had Dillard on one side and we had Suno on the other. So it was the let's go over to the campus and make sure that our counterparts at the PWI are doing well, and let's give them like the culture that they're missing, or quote unquote missing, I guess you could say. And let's, love on them a little bit too. So I feel like that's okay. If you want to go have and venture out, to the nearest HBCU and go to the games and see what that's like, that's okay as well. Especially if you feel like you're missing certain aspects at your own, institution.
In addition to everything that was said, I would just add to make sure you research whatever major or fields you're planning on going into, and look for Black professors that could mentor you beforehand, someone that you can talk to and just get to know and learn things about your community, and even look at adjacent majors as well if there's none in the major you're going into.
And I think it's important that we have conversations with our high school students seeking out these opportunities so that they are very clear and aware of the fact that, hey, these PWI institutions were not built with you in mind. And I think sometimes we do our students a disservice by not giving them that heads up, and then students who will transition in and think that, oh, I'm just going to have all of the opportunities afforded to me because that's what happens when you're in college, and that's not always the case. And so that preface and that very candid conversation sometimes of knowing that the system was not built with you in mind. But just because we may not be able to win with the current system in place doesn't mean that we're not going to learn how to finesse that system to work in our favor. And I love teaching my students how to finesse the system to make it work in your favor, because we're now a part of it. Therefore, we're going to make sure that we get out of it what we should be getting out of it. So we're going to maneuver. We're going to jump through all the loopholes. We are going to find those spaces that are specifically for us, and we're going to finesse the system to work to our benefit because we're now a part of it as well. But knowing that it's not going to be easy, and there are definitely some times when you're like, I'm not quite sure. I don't know how I ended up here, but now that I'm here, let's make it work for us.
I might also encourage you, that's great. I'd also encourage you to take a look on social media to see a lot of these PWIs are, you're starting to see on Instagram, different handles where students of color at these institutions are posting about their experiences. That's another good conduit of information that I would encourage you. Now, recognize you know how social media works. You're gonna get certain people that are gonna really leap onto that, and it might not be completely representative of the diversity of experiences that people have at that school, but they're voices that deserve to be heard. And so you have a sense of, some of the most poignant things that are happening on that campus that would relate to people that look like us. So definitely go check out social media and see if there are any areas where you can find out more information from the anonymous postings about what's going on at that institution. Another good place to check.
And this idea too of knowing, working your way and navigating through an institution so that you can have the experience and the opportunities that you want, that the institution promised you when you were a prospective student. Part of that process too is knowing from day one when you step foot on that campus what you're willing to compromise on and what you are not willing to compromise on. And frankly, you shouldn't compromise on anything, right? You are there, it's your life, it's your 4 years, it's your, or probably your parents' money. But you again deserve to be honored as who you are on that campus every day. And that starts from day one. But if you don't know, what do I want out of this experience? It's going to be much more difficult to figure out how to navigate the institution. And colleges and universities are very complex places. And there are lots of wonderful people who are there to help you navigate them. But if you're not even sure, why am I really here in the first place? What is it I want out of this experience? It's tough for a mentor, no matter how much they work for you, to help you get to what and where you want to be. So walk in confident, and the way you do that is by knowing this is the experience I want, and I'm going to ask for it from day one.
Thank you. Before we get started with our Q&A, I have one final question for the panelists. If you are Black and you attended a PWI, what do you wish your campus administrators knew when you attended?
I think that's a really good question. So yes, I mentioned I went to, for those of you, I went to Brown University as an undergrad. So it was not only a PWI, but an Ivy League school. I wish the administrators knew that the level of confusion that we had when an incident took place, what to do. It wasn't clear. Do we report it? Is this covered under free speech? Like what recourse did we have? And so that's one of the things that I've been very active about on my campus, is trying to make sure that there is some kind of check system that's very clear, that when you experience something, because it's not a matter of if, sadly, it's just a matter of when, you'll experience something that makes you feel uncomfortable. How do you report that? I think college campuses are doing a better job now when it's a sexual issue, where there's sexual misconduct or sexual harassment or something along those lines. You know who you should call, you know what will happen. There's a series of steps that take place. But let's say someone writes something on your dorm room door, or you hear something yelled at you from people driving by, and you're not sure what to do about it. I don't think administrators recognize that level of confusion just makes that situation more scary. So I wish that they knew that. And so the time spent in orientation on what to do and how you report an issue around a sexual issue, I wish they would give the same amount of time to when there's a racial issue that takes place on campus, so I know what to do and what will happen. There was a lot of confusion as an undergrad that I wish wasn't there, because it made things more scary.
I wish administrators knew that as Black students, we are going to navigate toward the very few Black faculty and staff that are on campus, kind of to be our compasses. And because there's so few of them and so many of us, those same faculty and staff are probably inundated with other students seeking them out as a resource, and there should be more. There should be way more Black faculty and staff of color who can serve in those roles, because by default, that just happens to be one of those other duties as assigned that we pick up as Black faculty and staff serving in this roles, because we know that students want someone that looks like them and that can relate from a background or from an experience. And so I wish administrators knew how vital it was to have an over-representation of faculty and staff of color to really meet the true needs of our students of color, because a lot of those needs aren't shared directly with administration. They are shared in those one-on-one meetings and come to Jesus meetings that we have with students, and those concerns are never shared with larger administration because the level of comfort just happens to be in spaces that we as faculty and staff of colors create. So there needs to be an over-representation of faculty and staff of color to service resources.
Thank you, Kayla. We're going to go ahead and move to the Q&A portion because we have some good questions in our Q&A box, and I want to make sure we get to them. I will get started with a student who posted a question. Her name is Micaiah Bedford. Micaiah, please charge it to my head and not to my heart if I mispronounced your name. But Micaiah says, hello, my name is Micaiah Bedford and I'm a rising senior from the West Coast. I was wondering how the socioeconomic gap between students of color in predominantly white schools affect their ability to socialize and find belonging in a social setting.
I'll jump in. Hi, thanks for your question. And I'm glad that you posted it. I think it's very relevant. So here's the thing. At a lot of these PWIs, there will be very wealthy students or students who had a lot more money than me. I can give you an example of my freshman roommate. I was working on campus for every penny. It was a very expensive undertaking for me to go to Brown. And so my roommate, her parents would send her like $50 checks, and she would just leave them lying around our room. And for me, $50 is a lot of money, right? And the disconnect between, she can just casually toss that aside, and I'm like getting up at 6 a.m. to go chop tomatoes for the salad bar so that I can have a little bit of money to be able to finish paying for my books. There was definitely that sense of disconnect. And sometimes it's very frustrating when you're dealing with people who don't understand the value of the dollar like I do. Even things like books, as a faculty member, I try to be sensitive that all the books that I adopt for my classes, I get a desk copy and I put that in the library so that students who can't afford books will have access to the books if they just check them out at the library. But not every faculty member is sensitive to that. So it is a real thing that you'll be going to school with people. So not only is it affecting in the classroom as far as access to books or supplemental materials, but also if they want to keep going to Starbucks every 5 minutes for social time, or go out to dinner, or go to a club, or some PWIs, the parties cost money. So here's the thing, you find your people. There are also going to be people at these schools who don't have much money either. And there's a lot of ways to have a great time on the college campus where you're not paying for it. So I'm just saying it's a very real issue, but there will be people who might be like you or like me. I wasn't alone chopping tomatoes. I made a lot of friends with people who are also chopping tomatoes for the salad bar. And those are some friends that I still have to this day. But also it's helpful to make friends with that roommate who can just, misplace a $50 check. Those are people whose daddies might have internship opportunities for you or things like that. And so it's about learning to navigate both finding your people and also finding people who have resources that you might benefit from one day and forming those relationships as well.
Thank you, Diane. So our next question comes from another student. Her name is Simi Adeyemo. Again, charge this in my head, not to my heart. Hey everyone, my name is Simi. For most of the time I've been in the United States, I've gone to predominantly white schools. And because of that, there's a little bit of a rift between me and the Black community. Not too big of a rift, but it's bigger than I thought it was. I've always felt like I wouldn't ever be able to relate to African Americans because of my experiences. So how do you think I should go about planting deeper roots in the Black community, especially if I go to a PWI?
I can chime in here. So awesome question. I'm right there with you. I am half Black, half white, grew up in a neighborhood that was largely very heavy minority students, but I love school, all things school. And I happened to be one of those that the Black kids thought that I was too white. I was too white for the Black kids and I was too Black for the white kids. And I wasn't quite sure where I was supposed to be. And so wasn't really deeply in tune with any of my my Black ancestry, my Black history, my Black background, anything of the sort, and felt that transitioning into college. But I also knew that that was a perfect opportunity for me to kind of dive in and take advantage of being surrounded by so many Black people who were also in similar we were all in a similar space. We were having similar experiences. And so for me, that meant simply showing up, being present at different events, finding different ways to get connected. In times when I didn't feel comfortable chiming in, I would take a seat, I would take a step back, and I would just kind of listen. I would observe. I would, get in tune to what some of the different trends are, what are the topics of conversation, finding ways to relate, and slowly but surely seeing some of those doors open to a point where I graduated and now am back on that exact same campus teaching African and African American studies, and I'm one of the most prominent kind of Black female names in that space. And so it took me some time, but be open to the new space, be open to observing, to asking questions, to getting connected, and also remembering that Black folks are not a monolith. So if you can't find your group with one specific type of Black people, it may be a trial and error where you are identifying with another type of Black people. We're so multifaceted, so complex in terms of our identities and our experiences, that I encourage you not to write off any one specific Black person just because you may not resonate with them, but genuinely continue to seek those experiences that will expose you to what Black life could potentially be if you're attempting to really dive in and take advantage of that experience. Because it's so fun once you get there, I promise.
One of my favorite shirts is being Black is lit. It's dangerous, but it's lit. And that is facts. Kaylin Beckford asks, what is a good way to research how committed a school is to equity and inclusion that filters the school's false advertisement?
I'll take that question. Like everyone has mentioned before, talk to the students, because of course admin and everyone who works for the school will say, oh no, we don't experience that, because they haven't experienced it. But really talking to people who look like you, reaching out to Black organizations to maybe come talk to people at your campus, those different things, you can really get a good perspective of what the school is like. And also some schools have like secret group chats that are like regular apps. So downloading one of those apps and just seeing how students communicate with each other, because one of my experiences at my school is, I knew there was racism at the school, of course, but like when I downloaded the app, I saw the blatant racism. And it's like, it's something you would never see unless you're a part of certain groups. So just like really communicating with the people there and also with the admin there.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to conflate two questions. Lisa Rawlings and Tandy Dilworth both had questions about the stats that you mentioned earlier, Diane. So where can they find graduation rates specifically for Black students? Where can they find those rates? And then are there any PWIs that you know of that have similar rates for Black students and white students as well?
Great. Well, like I said, this is where you get to start doing your homework. We were talking about finding your fit, right? So here's the thing. Most schools who have a strong retention rate, so retention rate meaning after they've been there for the first year, they're coming back for the second year. So you want to know that percentage number, right? How many students start out here, stay here? That's going to be one of the key pieces of information that a school will have right up on their website if it's strong, right? It'll be right there on their admissions webpage. They're going to advertise it because that's a big selling point for the school, that people come and they stay. But here's what you do. If you can't find that broken down by race, you contact the admissions office and you ask. They have the number. They may just not want it. They may not want to advertise it. but the number's there, and that's an important question. Another thing many students don't know or haven't heard is that for your, look, wherever you are, whatever state you're in, your high school, you will have a dedicated admissions officer at that PWI who's responsible for your area. So when you contact the admissions office, you might, before you start asking these questions, ask for the person at that office who's responsible for your region. That's the person who's going to be reading your application, right? You want to know that person's name and start developing a relationship with that person. That person is then who you can ask. They are going to be familiar with your high school. They may have a relationship with your counselor at your high school, but they're going to know sort of the lay of the land that you're coming from and how students from that area seem to fare at their school. So that's going to be a good person to ask. Can you please be more specific on the retention rate for African-American students, African-American women, African-American men, or if they have some gender non-binary data, like ask about that information. Again, if it's good, it'll be published readily available. If it's not good, they're hiding it and you need to ask directly. But the most important thing you can do is find the person's name out who is the admissions rep for your area and start forming a relationship with that person, and they can answer these questions for you if you can't find it on the website.
Yeah, everybody, the Department of Education requires that all institutions have this data. So everybody's got it, okay? Whether or not they're putting it front and center is a different story. So if you go to that admissions officer, they might be cagey about it, that might be a red flag. Or they might just not know it because it sadly might be the first time somebody's asked them that question.
Right, but they can't get that information, yeah.
They can get that answer for you, and they should be prepared to answer that question for you. And I would argue, if you are a young woman as well, how many women, let's say I'm interested in engineering, well, how many women in engineering are there? And how many Black women are there in the entering class in the engineering school? And how many of them walk across that stage at the end of the 4 years? Or 5 or 6, right, depending. But that data has to be, the Department of Education requires that. If you want it really quick and they're not getting it for you, there's the Journal of Blacks in Higher Education is a great resource. It's the JBHE. They have a lot of stats and a lot of data about this. It is a little old, but they do have data on graduation rates for Black students as compared to white students, as compared to all different kinds of students from all different backgrounds. And so that's aggregated as well. I would just say, just a little asterisk here, this is the sociologist and statistician and coming out of me. It's really important that when you're looking at data though, that you're really an informed consumer of that data. Just because a college or university might have, let's say, a 20% higher graduation rate for Black students versus everybody else, it doesn't necessarily mean you want to be there. Because if that overall graduation rate for Black students is still only 40% in 6 years, that's of concern, right? So that freshman retention rate, that 4-year, 5-year, 6-year graduation rate, everybody's graduating close to the same levels. It's all good data to have, but you got to put it in context. And I would say that typically the more selective a school gets, the higher those rates are going to be. But again, don't just assume because that number looks good, it's going to work for you, because you're unique. There's nobody else like you. And depending upon what you want out of the experience, it may not be a good fit for you. So again, do your homework.
I just want to voice over. I see a few things asking questions that are specific to certain institutions. I will say it's really important, as several of the panelists have said, to do your individual research, because not all colleges are created equal, and especially as it relates to caring for and supporting Black students. So a student asked a question about, which region is safest, whether it's West, East, South, etc. And so I just shared with her, while the South does have deeper roots with racism, there are great schools in the South. So it's just a matter of finding what works for you as a student, instead of looking at a cookie cutter or looking through a cookie cutter lens as it relates to institutions. Okay, Clarice Okunwafo, she asks, do you think going to a private PWI might give a student a different experience compared to a public PWI?
I can jump in, but everybody else, please feel free to join in this response. Absolutely, I think yes. In part, it has to do with the financial aid support that you might find at a private PWI than at a public PWI. So for example, you might find that there's going to be more money available to support you at a private school than there will be at a large public state school, especially if you're coming from out of state. So to keep in mind, there's a financial angle to that question. I think some of the private schools are sometimes more able to be responsive to the student body more so than some of the larger public schools can be, because there are pockets of money at these schools linked to their endowment, linked to research, linked to initiatives that these schools will have, and that you might be able to tap into. At some of the larger public schools, it might be more difficult. There may be more bureaucracy that you're dealing with, trying to get some of those more immediate things to flow your way. So my experience has been, it's a little easier to navigate a space as a woman of color at a private school because there were more resources that I could more readily access. At a public school though, some of the resources run deep. You might have larger opportunities, larger pools of folks to tap into. There might be more people of color there, more faculty of color at some of these more public schools than at some of the private schools. So it really does depend on the school. But in general, I think there's more money at the private schools.
I would add to that, that, while there are big differences between maybe private institutions, private PWIs versus public PWIs, even within that category of public PWI, there are so many different species, varieties of those, some that are very small and intimate that actually feel like maybe a small private liberal arts college, and some that are, 60,000, 70,000 deep. And the same thing with private PWIs as well. There's some that, I've worked with students who've they've wanted really tiny, and they've gone to Haverford College, which has 1,200 undergraduates, and others have wanted to be at a big, large urban place and have gone to NYU, which has, well over, 20, 25,000 undergrads, and your dorm is your apartment building in Manhattan. So they're all so different. And, again, I know I sound like a broken record here, but this is where sort of knowing thyself and knowing what you want out of your experience matters. If you want to go on and get a PhD in neuroscience, and you want undergraduate research opportunities, and you want to work closely with professors as an undergraduate so that you can get those great recommendations for graduate school, you look at the top 20 of the top 25 schools in the United States that send the highest proportion of their science alums to get PhDs are small liberal arts colleges or around there, right? So, if I'm working with a student, and they say, I want to get a PhD in neuroscience, what's a great place for that? My question is that really what's driving your search? And if it is, I can share with you a great, wonderful list of schools. But when we layer on what you want personally, what you want socially, those schools may not be for you. So it's hard to say, what is my experience going to be here in the skin that I'm in? Because even public-private, there's so much variation even in those categories. So again, sorry, but you got to do your homework.
Absolutely. And that homework should also include what happened with post-coronavirus, that a lot of these schools the smaller schools, especially the smaller private schools, were really hit pretty hard and continue to be hit pretty hard by COVID-19 financial changes to that institution. So definitely keep an eye on how these schools treated their students when they had to leave in March, and how they're treating them now this fall. What kind of structure they're having, how's that school's financial standing, you know, in the midst of this pandemic. So definitely keep that as part of your research.
Thank you. Friends, if you all could hang tight for a few extra minutes, we have some great questions I want to make sure we get to in the chat. I want to voice something over before I ask the next question. This is from Juan Figueroa. I wish my institution knew how shocking the wealth of my peers was compared to my peers at my public school. I was never ready for this. Also, PWIs need to have dedicated faculty to help students with internships. Kids of color have no idea how this works. I, as a business major, had no one to sit me down to talk to about internships. As a result, as my friends in the business school were on internships during the summer, I was happy to have a summer job as a trash collector. And I just wanted to share Juan's experience in the space. And of course, everyone's experience is different, but there were some great points there for institutions to consider, my friends who are on the college side on the call. Okay, Deidre Cuffy Gray would like to know, is there a climate-based list similar to Campus Pride for LGBTQIA+ students for prospective BIPOC students, specifically Black students? There are IG's accounts like Black @ but is there anything more like a clearinghouse?
So currently, I'm at the community college, but of course at the previous universities that I did attend, anything, not attend, sorry, worked at, choice of words. There was an actual breakdown of the organizations and their websites and what their specific missions were in regards to students. So I know from, you know, doing like a deep dive on the university itself, those lists definitely are available there from the institution itself. Because that is, of course, just as the same as those fun facts or those fast facts for the school. They do want to list their clubs and organizations and definitely put at the forefront those that are multicultural or minority based, because they do want to show, you know, that equity and inclusion. So those lists are available there. So it would just be looking maybe at like student affairs website or like student organization websites to find, you know, that information. And then of course those spin off their specific, you know, personal IG accounts.
Thank you. A follow-up from Deidre is, are there intersections with gender and being Black on PWI campuses worth paying attention to for prospective students? For example, are there general experiences for Black male-identified students versus Black female-identified students and or queer Black students?
This can get a little touchy. So I can give you, an example as a faculty member. So I was at a very highly selective PWI private school, and the numbers of that school, they had about 2,200 undergrads, and I pretty regularly had African American women, female identified students in my office in tears, because socially the African American male students they were interested in, these were cisgendered women, were typically a hot commodity on that campus with women of other races, or primarily the white women at the schools. And so they were very lonely and were struggling with social life. I'm not, obviously I'm a big, like, date who you want to date, love is love. I don't care what color they are. But for a lot of these students, it was a very lonely social experience because the men were experimenting with a lot of other things, not them. And that was hard for some of them. So I think that there's definitely some different experiences that especially cisgendered Black male students will have at these PWIs that cisgendered female students may have some of our own unique experiences and unique challenges socially at these schools. I think I'm not in the position, I think, to speak authentically for people who are queer, but I do know that some students who were at my institution felt sometimes they had to choose between the queer community or the Black community. And that was really difficult and should not have to happen. But this is, again, I'm talking about several decades ago. I'm hoping that things have made baby step progress forward, but I'll defer to some of the younger folks on the call.
So we have time for the last two. I'll move forward, but if anyone wants to jump back on that at the end, feel free. Yolanda asks, do you think it's easier for students of color to access financial aid at predominantly white institutions versus predominantly Black institutions?
I think the process is easier as far as like getting a response to paperwork, like that, if she's referencing that aspect of financial aid, like filling out the FAFSA or having somebody to help with that, and then potentially walking the steps through, or that aid being readily available in a timely manner. There is definitely a difference there. Of course, I went to a mid-size PWI, and having those conversations with my friends at HBCUs, where I would turn in my paperwork and in literally like the typical, they say 5 to 7 business days, but 3 to 5 business days, everything for me is complete and ready to go. And I just need to accept it if it's not already auto accepted for you, especially anything that's grants. Of course, anything loans, we have to go through the necessary process to accept that documentation. If you call, somebody was readily available to answer. If you emailed, the email was, somebody will respond in 24 to 48 hours. My friends, on the other hand, have said, oh, like you have to go here because you need to get this sheet to get that stamp, then to go over here to this office to do this. And they end up having this 2 to 3 hour, maybe longer process that ends up or results in nothing. And you have to come back and start all over the next day. But of course, I think that again has to do with sometimes the lack of resources and the lack of finances being poured into the HBCUs versus, the PWIs. And that's a fact, whether it's private, whether it's public. We know that there's disparities there. And then that also plays into the, socioeconomic piece because of the lack of funding, the lack of money, the lack of things, that you see. But in that, it also could spur some type of camaraderie as well. So.
And just to,
Go ahead.
Back on that, my sister is currently going to an HBCU, and she was offered about 25% of her full tuition, whereas me at a PWI, I got a full ride scholarship. So it's really depending on the school, and you have to just, if you can afford it, be willing to apply to different schools to see what they're offering. And you can also look into what scholarships you would qualify for with your current standing in high school.
And I'll just add, a lot of state colleges, whether they are PWI or HBCUs, a lot of state schools are pretty explicit on their scholarships page with a chart and all that jazz to let you know if you have this GPA and this test score, this is the money you'll receive. Now, in these COVID times, we know that colleges are offering test optional as an option, but pay attention because test optional doesn't necessarily mean they don't require test scores for scholarships. And so more on that later. One thing I want to voice over before we get to Juan Figueroa's question. We received some real-time feedback that I want to honor and acknowledge. And I won't call the individual's name because she sent it directly to the panelists. And so I want to honor that. But her concern was that we were painting PWIs in a bad light for Black students. And I want to first validate her feelings because that's not our intention, but that is how we impacted her. And so I want to honor that. But also I want to say we are looking at this through a lens of preparation. And so we want Black students, Black families who are on the call to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's really important to have that wealth of knowledge before making such a big decision. So we hear you and we'll make adjustments because we don't get everything right, but that was definitely not the intent.
And I just want to jump in and say, I went to a mid-size PWI in New Orleans, Louisiana. So I went to the University of New Orleans. And my experience at my PWI was a really good one. Like, I enjoyed my experience there at the University of New Orleans. And I consider it a unique experience because of the fact that I was in New Orleans. And so for me, that was a big plus. Like, all of my schools that I had actually were HBCUs that I applied to. And then this was the lone a PWI. And that was just because I was able to have, this wonderful cultural experience. And it actually mirrored my high school because my high school was a mixed high school in, an African-American community. And so we had those like positive, definitely cultural experiences. Now I didn't have as much representation as I would have liked to see with, my professors and staff, but those that I did have truly like impacted my life and actually the work that I am currently doing. And my professors actually were some of the ones who propelled my institution to the place it was, as far as like equal rights just for the school itself, equal rights for students of color. So I definitely, again, want to say, like, I think we, and speaking for myself, did have a good experience, but to definitely, let them know that, again, representation does matter, and that in having these conversations, the good, the bad, the ugly, we can make changes and steps towards a positive direction. And you can't necessarily prepare a student for everything that they're going to face, but at least you can give them an overview so it won't be necessarily a shock to their system. And again, that they'll know how to advocate for themselves. So.
Great. And thanks. And I, just want to make sure that I can add a voice. I know we've got a panel about this later about, thinking about Ivy League schools and things, but hands down, never looked back. I had the most incredible experience at Brown. It's an amazing school. I have my PhD, I think in good part because I went to Brown and the mentors that I had at Brown who were not Black. I think letters from my professors opened doors for me. The social life at Brown was fantastic. I absolutely loved going to school. I was far away from home. I'm from San Diego, California. So going to Providence, Rhode Island, 3,000 miles away from home. I didn't know anybody there. It was a big transition, a big move, and Brown was absolutely the perfect place for me. You've heard us mention how important fit is. And there's a reason I chose Brown, and it was exactly right for me. Did it make Brown a perfect place? No, but it was perfect for me at the time. So I appreciate the feedback from students that you might have been hearing quite a bit of what's wrong with PWIs, and to provide us with this opportunity to also add what's right about some of the PWIs. And I I'm so grateful and so glad that I went to Brown. And I would encourage students who it's the right fit for to strongly consider schools like Brown.
Well, I'll just add to this love fest. I'm an alum of the University of Oklahoma, and yeah, I'm from Houston originally, so I was always surrounded by Black folks, Black and brown folks, you know, all the time. And then I get to Norman, Oklahoma. So it was definitely a culture shock, but I found my people and it ended up being a great experience. I will still argue anyone down to this day. Now, as Kayla mentioned earlier, OU has had some challenges with racism, with all the isms, right? Because it's a huge institution. But what really stood out to me, and this is something to pay attention to, how do the administrators respond when these issues happen? When students are confronted with racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., how does the president respond? Does the president respond? You know, those are things to really focus on, because you will not find an institution that is without conflict, without stress, without challenges. But how do the people who are at the decision-making table address those things? That's what really made OU a pleasant experience for me, because the president at the time always addressed those things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so Juan Figueroa, and this is the last question for the evening. As a BC grad from '92, I was a member of a transition orientation program. The OTE program, Options Through Education, run by Donald Brown and Joanna Maynard. It was amazing. It was a 6-week residential program where students built tremendous friendships with like-minded students before they started their freshman year. I believe they have had a graduation rate of over 90%. Can panelists talk about other institutions that offer this type of program?
So there's a lot of different pre-orientation and orientation programs available across the spectrum of PWIs, whether they're public, private, smaller, private liberal arts, larger research universities. And I think now more than ever, universities are actually using those programs as recruitment tools. I'm hesitant to recommend or name specific institutions, only because I think that, first of all, they can be controversial. There are some folks who actually don't feel good about these programs. But in general, I think Juan's comment is one that I hope, especially if they're parents listening, that they'll be on the lookout for some of these programs, because they do help students build a social network for themselves before everybody else gets to campus. And so when everybody's crazy during orientation, desperately looking for friends, making poor choices because it's the first time they're away from mom and dad, you have a group of friends to kind of help you navigate that. And I think that that's a really powerful experience. I know Dr. Graves says we share an alma mater, and I know that Brown in the past has a program that changed its name because that the nomenclature of the program was controversial for a lot of folks. But my friends who participated in that program, granted I graduated 20 years ago, but friends I had who I graduated Brown with, who participated in that program, loved it because it did build a sense of community and camaraderie from day one. And frankly, many of them were like Dan, who maybe this was the first time they were on the East Coast. You know,
absolutely transformative. It was transformative. Yeah. Some people may be wondering, why would that program be controversial? It's not necessarily controversial with people of color. It's controversial with people who don't get to come to it.
Exactly.
And so that's really where the pushback comes. And I'm sorry, I think there's so much value, and I'm going to be biased because I had went to such a program and it was transformative for me. There's tremendous value, and for the reasons you've wonderfully articulated, there's a tremendous value to these programs. And one of the things that was nice about Brown's program is it was primarily driven by the students. It wasn't driven by the administration. It was students who were juniors and seniors and graduating who wanted to make sure to pass the baton to the incoming students. So we weren't continuously reinventing the wheel. That we knew the recent history of Black students on campus. We knew what they had done, and they could then pass that along to us so that we can continue the momentum forward. But my best friends to this day were friends that I made at that program. I still made lots of friends at Brown who didn't go to the program, which is sort of some of the pushback is like, you already have your friends, you don't want to make new friends. I made lots of friends outside of that program, but I've got to tell you, it was an incredibly valuable opportunity. So if a school has an opportunity for you to go to campus a couple of days or a couple of weeks before orientation starts, I urge you to go, to take advantage of that opportunity. You will be so glad that you did.
They also do a little bit of like how to navigate the university 101, which again is really invaluable if I think any and all students could probably benefit from something like that. But I think particularly if you are a Black student going to a PWI, and if your high school was not a PWI, having that sort of in your back pocket on day one, like, yeah, I know who the dean is. If I have this situation pop up and I know that that person's an advocate and I know where their office is a really amazing way to sort of hit the ground running your first couple weeks of university.
And for verbiage purposes, I think that there are quite a few programs that are named like summer bridge programs. So if you're looking for different ways to tap into these opportunities, look into different summer bridge programs and the different transitionary programs. I did want to take a quick second to address some of the feedback. Michelle states that she heard that some students may feel tricked whenever they're part of these programs because they don't feel like it's a true narrative once school actually starts. And that is absolutely valid feedback. Thanks for chiming in there. I think that it's important to note that when these programs are being facilitated, that's also a conversation to be had with students and knowing and understanding that this may not be a true reflection of what your experience like or what your daily experience is going to be like whenever you're here on campus. But having established this community, you now have a home base. You have, a group of people, a group of support and resources that when you come to realize that this is not going to be your daily experience, you know that you've got a group of folks that are in your corner that are going to support you and are going to kind of help keep you above water when some of those times come that you're not quite sure what you're supposed to be doing, or hey, this is not what I expected and this is definitely not what I thought I was getting myself into. So great feedback, but yes, look into some of those transitionary programs, summer bridge programs. There are also a couple of different scholarship programs. If you're looking into, they tend to be the 4-year scholarship programs that come with the academic leadership and career development aspect. And so in addition to the scholarship that you're also being awarded, you're meeting once a week, or once a month with this cohort of scholars that are also transitioning into campus with you, and you're experiencing similar things. And so different ways to tap into these communities before you get to campus and even once you're on campus.
Thank you, Kayla. And thank you to the 100 folks who stayed with us to the bitter end. We are 24 minutes over time, but it was some great conversation. I really hope we got to all of the questions. I feel like we did, but if we didn't, please know it wasn't intentional. We will have several other sessions every Tuesday for the next 3 weeks. We're having additional sessions, and then we'll have a break and we'll offer even more. So just stay tuned. We're really excited to continue this conversation with you and encourage anyone in your circle, student, faculty, whomever, your mama, encourage anyone who could benefit from this session to join us. We'd love to have more voices and more experiences in our space. So thank you all so much. I'll hang out for a few minutes in case there's anything pressing, but everyone else, we are dismissed. Y'all have a great night.
Did we need to restate names and where we're from real quick just for
Yep.
folks?
Forgot about that. Yes, we did have a request for everyone to restate their names and where they work. So Kayla, you start us off.
Kayla Storrs, Assistant Director for Diversity Enrichment Programs at the University of Oklahoma.
I'm Angelica Keelan, and I'm a kindergarten teacher for KIPP.
Diane.
Dr. Diane Graves, I'm an Associate Professor of Psychology and Counseling at Hood College in Frederick, Maryland.
Stefan.
Stefan Golis, college counselor at the University of Chicago Laboratory Schools in Chicago, Illinois. Well, starting next week.
Kelly.
Hi, Kelly Emerson, academic advisor for Lee College Trio Student Support Services in Baytown, Texas, which is right outside of Houston.
And I'm Dr. Ashley Bennett, Director of College Counseling at KIPP Sunnyside High School in Houston by day and by night, except. All right, guys, thank y'all so much. Log off, have a good evening. Again, you can stick around if you have any questions for me.
Thanks, friends.
And thank you to everyone who's had all kinds of great things to say in the chat. Y'all are gushing over us and we're all blushing. So we really appreciate it. Note to panelists, next time we have to have some intro and outro music going. Beyonce blessed us. We didn't take advantage of that. I mean, there are so many things we need to do.
Sharon is still on. This will be recorded, right? It'll be, it's actually streaming live on Facebook currently.
Yeah.
So you should watch it on Facebook, Sharon.
And Marie said earlier that she's gonna get some, I can't think of the words right now. Basically, she'll upload it later in the week. She's going to get words. Someone help me.
Transcripts?
Thank you.
Oh.
I could not get my word together. Transcripts. Yes, Stefan. So she'll get a transcript for the session and then go ahead and upload everything. So it will be available before the week's end.
Got it.
Okay. Well, I don't see any. Wait, hold on. Do I see a question? No. So I think we're good. If you have a question, speak now. We definitely want to make sure we acknowledge it.
I lied to Juan. I threw him a name.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, so everything was addressed. All right, well, I think we are good to go. Thank you all for attending with us today, and we hope to see you next Tuesday, same time. Y'all have a great evening.